We are live. Check. We are live. Today is Friday, November 22nd, 2024. It's my father's birthday. Today he turns 70. And today is also the 61-year anniversary since the assassination of former President John Fitzgerald Kennedy, or JFK. And the Kennedy assassination was, and probably still is, one of the greatest mysteries of American history. And I was so fascinated with the Kennedy assassination that I wrote a 75-page analysis of the astrological chart for the day of the assassination, which was November 22nd, 1963, Dallas, Texas at 12:30. And you could say that was a little obsessive, but I was obsessed, and I think that I did a fabulous job interpreting the chart for that incident or the event. And that is in the third book that I wrote, which is called Smorgasbord 3, Poverty and Prophecy. And that's the third book in the Smorgasbord series. The first book is Smorgasbord, a collection of thoughts, experiences, and stories. This is the first book that I wrote. I quickly followed that up with a second book, Smorgasbord 2, Catch Up and Relish. And both books were self-published, and they're available in paperback and ebook format. You can purchase them at barnesandnoble.com or amazon.com, and I'm pretty sure wherever else books are sold. It wasn't long after that I wrote, and I didn't publish, but I wrote Smorgasbord 3. That was by far the largest of the three books. Smorgasbord 3 was a 61,000 or 62,000 word manuscript, and I sent it out. I sent it out because the first two books that I wrote, I self-published, and I said to myself, you know what? When I write Smorgasbord 3, I'm going to try to send it out to a traditional publishing house because I want to see if if I can publish it traditionally. And so it was turned down. I'm not going to name the publishing houses, but it was in fact turned down at least three times so far. And there was a publishing company in New York that said that it wasn't ready to be published, which I know is bullshit, but so I don't really know what it is. I don't know if it's the analysis of the Kennedy assassination, because that is, I don't know why, but it still is such a sensitive topic in certain circles. Nobody really wants to talk about that or deal with that. But how could you not? So that's the third book. It was Smorgasbord 3, Poverty and Prophecy, and that book is still unpublished. A completed manuscript of 61,000 words sitting in my possession. But back to Kennedy, that was and probably still is one of the greatest mysteries of our country's history. And there was video footage of Kennedy riding in the car, in the motorcade, and everybody, they blamed Lee Harvey Oswald for the murder. They said that he shot from the book depository, and he was responsible for killing John F. Kennedy. I never believed that, because if you even watch the video, it shows the president's head down, and then the fatal shot, when it comes in, his head goes back and to the right or to the left. It's like that. So you know that the shot had to come from the front, because if it's pushing the head back, then it has to come from the front. And people still ignore that. Now, one of the best testimonies that I feel was given by the police chief of Dallas at the time, who I think was riding in the car in front of President Kennedy. And he said as soon as they made that turn, I don't remember which street it was, if it was Elm or Dealey Plaza. I don't remember which street it was. But they came and they made a turn around a bend, and they were coming to an overpass. And in the police chief's testimony, he says that there was about 12 or 13 people standing on top of the overpass. And they weren't supposed to be there. Nobody was supposed to be, well, definitely not on the overpass. So that in itself was a mystery. And so he looks up, and there was a shot fired, and the police chief says on the radio, "You better get somebody on top of that overpass." And so, I mean, you have to take that into consideration. People standing on the overpass, the president's head going back, them driving towards the overpass. I mean, that shot could have come from the overpass, or it could have even come possibly from ground level. I think there was more than one shooter. I think there was a shooter behind him, but I think that there were two shooters in front of him that were shooting crisscross. And somebody got him. They got him. I mean, we all know the story, but there was a lot of things that were going on at that time that nobody really talks about. The cover up of that whole situation was just extensive. There was a girl who was a roommate of a girl who I think worked for Jack Ruby. And I don't know what the connection was. Obviously, I mean, the girl was probably going to start talking, but the police ended up arresting this female, and they put her in jail, and she was found hung in jail. So they came to the house, they arrested her on a charge of domestic dispute. They said that she was arguing with her friend. They arrested her, put her in jail, and she was murdered in jail and found hung. So there could have been a leak there. There could have been a leak between her roommate, which was another female that worked for Jack Ruby, and this girl. And so that's one of the things that nobody talks about. Another thing that nobody really talks about is that overpass that those guys were standing on was like a midway point. So you have the motorcade, which I like to call Area 1. So you have Area 1, which is the motorcade and what is going on with the president, Lee Harvey Oswald in the book depository behind the car. But that's all Area 1. Area 2 is another area that one of the police officers, I think it was J.D. Tippett, was called to. Now, every Dallas police officer responded to the Kennedy assassination. J.D. Tippett was the only police officer that went in the opposite direction. And he ended up getting murdered that day. They blamed that on Oswald as well. And they found in the back of his car, now he was a police officer, and they found an extra police uniform in the back of his car, which tells you that the shooter could have possibly have been disguised as a Dallas police officer. So when you put all of this together, The shot had come from the front. Could have been there was a mix. They said there was a mixture of workers and somebody else on the overpass. I think that the guy who shot Kennedy, I'm not going to get into the whole thing, but I believe that the shot did come from the front, and that person went to area 2, and somehow Tippit was involved. I don't know if um he was supposed to take the shooter out of the area or what, but what they said ended up happening was that I think he actually came face to face with the person who shot Kennedy, and then he shot JD Tippit, took the police officer uniform off, threw it in the back of his car, and left. And there was a witness. And you know what? When the ambulance arrived on the scene, JD Tippit was still talking, even though he was shot fatally. He was still talking. But all the reports say that he was dead, on arrival, that he was DOA, and when the ambulance pulled up, he was already dead. But there's other testimony that talks about what he was saying before he died, and he did reveal some information. So there was 2 areas. There was the area where the president was shot, and then there was what I call area 2, which is kind of like the aftermath, where I think the person not Oswald, but the person who really shot Kennedy ran to, shot and then went that way. And, everybody came here. Everybody came to the motorcade. He was probably by the overpass, shot and went back that way. So everybody came here. He went in the opposite direction and to make the getaway. So there's a lot of stuff that went on in area 2, not just JD Tippit, but there was another person who did witness something, but he ended up getting murdered, this person, or maybe not murdered, but he was assaulted, and he did go to the hospital. And when he left the hospital, he said that he didn't have memory of anything that happened. Like, he completely lost his memory from the head trauma or whatever happened to him. But the point of this is that there was a massive cover up, and nobody in their right mind. I mean, if you believe that Lee Harvey Oswald was responsible for killing Kennedy, then you're just saying that to go along with it. Like, you're doing no critical thinking. You're not probably not even and looking at the facts of what happened. But it's just a big mystery, because you look at a guy like Kennedy and you look at all the good that he was doing for the country at that time. He wanted to bring the troops home. He had, he supported the working middle class. Like, there was a lot of good things that he had planned, and he was a smart guy. He was a war hero, a decorated veteran, Purple Heart winner. And so why somebody would want to kill him, it just adds to the whole thing. And it wasn't just him, that was a time when, a lot of people, I don't believe that Marilyn Monroe overdosed. She died the year before him, and they said it was an overdose. Martin Luther King was killed in 1968. There was another murder, assassination. Robert Kennedy, who's now in politics today, his father, RFK Sr., was murdered on 6/6 and 1968. He was murdered in California. And so there was a lot of stuff going on back then, a lot of crazy, crazy stuff. And but the Kennedy assassination is and probably will always be one of the greatest mysteries of American history. But I have a pretty good idea of who's responsible for that, and I'm going to leave it there as far as the Kennedy assassination goes. So today is the 22nd. It's 61 years since the assassination. It's a waning gibbous moon tonight. We're in the last quarter phase. It's going to be illuminated at 54% in the astrological sign of Leo. So there is a new moon that's coming up soon. Heliocentric and geocentric models in astrology. I wanted to talk about that I just wanted to mention that because a lot of people are confused. So geo is in reference to the Earth. So a geocentric model is pretty much what we use. It's an Earth-centered model with all the planets and the sun, with the exception of the Earth in rotation. Obviously, because the Earth is at the center. So it's a geocentric model. The Earth is in the center, and the sun and the rest of the planets are orbiting the Earth. There's a heliocentric model, which takes the sun now out of rotation and puts the sun in the center. So now you have all the planets, including the Earth, orbiting the sun. And I think the geocentric model is supposed to represent our view of the heavens from Earth. So the geocentric model is the most widely used. Now, when it comes to zodiac types, the tropical zodiac is probably the most widely used, but the sidereal or the sidereal, however you pronounce it, is the most accurate for the sun's position. So if you really want to know where the sun was when you were born, the sidereal or the sidereal model would be the most accurate. Um, tropical In a tropical geocentric model, I'm an Aquarius with a sun on the 18th degree of Aquarius in the seventh house. In a sidereal geocentric model, I'm a Capricorn. So there's a lot of people that that you know aren't really the sun sign that they were born under. We all have that. I mean, that's for everybody. The sidereal or the sidereal model could be. I mean, everybody can use that. So it's worth looking at. It's worth checking into, especially if you feel like you display traits and qualities and characteristics of another sign. Now, the sidereal model kind of it's really based on the astronomy, not the astrology, and the astronomy is what tracks the real position of the sun. And the difference between astrology and astronomy is that astrology is man-made and astronomy is the actual tracking of the sun through the heavens throughout the duration of the calendar year. Astrology uses 12 signs. It's a 360-degree circle split into 30-degree sections, 12 30-degree sections, 12 signs, 12 houses. Astronomy uses 13 constellations. Ophiuchus is one of them. So that's what's included. That's not included in astrology. Astronomy uses 13 constellations, Ophiuchus being one of them. And it tracks the sun's actual position throughout the duration of the year. And also, which is very interesting about this, is that the time that the sun spends in these signs in astronomy is different. I know that now this is really interesting because according to the astronomical tracking of the sun moves into Libra on Halloween, on October 31st. Okay. And it stays in Libra for 23 days. Then it leaves Libra on the 22nd. And on the 23rd, it goes into Scorpio, where it stays for 7 days until the 30th of November. And then it goes into Ophiuchus for 18 days. So it's really interesting when you think about it, because the sun actually I would probably say in an 8-day period, the sun will have changed signs or constellations 3 times. So when you think about the Kennedy assassination and all the confusion that went on during that time, think about the astronomy that was going on at that time. The sun goes into Libra on Halloween, October 31st. And then the sun's last day in Libra is November 22nd, the day of the assassination. On November 23rd, the sun enters Scorpio and it stays there for 7 days. 11/29 is the day that the Warren Commission was put together to do the investigation. That was the sun's last day in Scorpio. The next day, the sun goes into Ophiuchus for 18 days. So it's a really interesting time. And for the assassination to have happened at that time, I mean, I don't know if that's coincidence, if that was planned, but it just adds to the whole mystery of everything. The sun changes signs or constellations 3 times in that period. The 22nd, the 23rd, and then the 30th. So it goes from Libra to Scorpio to Ophiuchus between the 22nd and the 30th of November. The Chirotic cycle. Now, that's the cycle of Chiron. And Chiron's cycle or orbit is a 50-year period. So the Chirotic cycle is Chiron's orbit around the sun. Now, Chiron is the little key symbol. If you look at an astrology chart, you'll see the little key symbol. That's Chiron. Okay, so it takes Chiron 50 years to make one orbit around the zodiac. That cycle is known as the Chirotic cycle, and it has a lot to. It has a huge bearing on the development of humans. And it's broken down into, I think, four major alignments or points in the cycle. So, as an example, I have Chiron on the 9th degree of Taurus in the 10th house. Okay. So the first major part of that cycle is the first square. So the first square that Chiron makes to its natal position, that's the first major transit or point. Okay. So if it's in 9 degrees in Taurus, then it will go 9 degrees Gemini, 9 degrees Cancer, 9 degrees Leo. That's 90 degrees. So it will move 90 degrees from its natal position. Okay. So it will move 90 degrees and it will square because, a square is an aspect of 90 degrees. So it will square its natal position. Okay. Then it will move another 90 degrees. So it goes from 9 degrees Leo to 9 degrees Virgo, 9 degrees Libra, 9 degrees Scorpio. When it reaches the 9th degree of Scorpio, it has moved 180 degrees and now it's in opposition to its natal position. That's the second major transit point or second major point in the cycle. Then it will move 90 degrees again for the second square that it forms to its natal position. And then it closes up and finishes when it returns back to where it was when you were born. So it goes first square, opposition, first square to itself, opposition to its natal position, second square to its natal position, and then the orbit is complete. Now, that first square could happen at any point between 5 years old and 23 years old. And the occurrence of the first square really dictates a lot about the development of the individual. I suggest that you definitely research that and find out when it is. I know that Chiron moves through the signs, certain signs it takes a long time for it to get through certain signs. And then other signs it moves real quick. I know that it's in Aquarius for a long time, it's in Aries for a long time, it's in Taurus for a long time, and it's in, I think, Pisces for a long time. And then once it gets to Gemini and Cancer, then it starts, it's not in those signs. Gemini, Cancer, Leo, Virgo, like, it's not in those signs for a long time, but it takes a while for it to get through, I think, four of the signs. So yeah, the first square could happen at any point between 5.5 years old and 23 years old. And the later that it happens, I know that it has a certain bearing on the development. Um, and then, it could say something different about the individual the earlier it happens. So the point that it takes to make that first square will tell you a lot about your development. So it's definitely worth researching. And like I said, they call that the Chirotic cycle, which is really the tracking of Chiron's orbit, which takes 50 years. Now, the whole thing with Chiron is that they say by the time it makes its return in 50 years and completes that orbit, if you have done the work through that time, then you're supposed to have raised Kundalini energy through the chakras. You're supposed to have an open crown, and you're supposed to be able to reap the rewards of the Chiron orbit or the Chiron return. I'm not there yet. I'm only 44 years old. I don't know if my chakras are unblocked at this point. Um, but yeah, that's what they say, that you're supposed to have Kundalini energy, supposed to have been raised. All of those chakra centers are supposed to be blown out. You're supposed to be current with the time. You're supposed to be over any past life trauma. All your lessons, all of that stuff supposed to be all completed by 50. And if it is, then you stand to gain from whatever Chiron brings back in its return. And it will bring back something. Trust me. He definitely will bring back something to you. I know that the Saturn return brought astrology to me. So I've been studying and practicing astrology since 2009. And that came with the Saturn return. I was never interested in it, never studied it, never looked at it, really never had anything to do with it. And all of a sudden, it just kind of like fell in my lap. And it happened to coincide with the Saturn return. So let's see. We are 52 years away right now from the perihelion of Sedna. And for those of you who don't know, Sedna is a planet that has an 11,400 year orbit. It takes 11,400 years for Sedna to make one orbit around the sun. So it takes 11,400 years. And then let's just say this microphone is the sun. So this planet is like way out into the fringes and the most extreme areas of the solar system, as you could probably imagine, because it takes 11,400 years to make one orbit. So when it passes the sun, it goes way out to a place that we call the Oort cloud. And then it comes back in. And then when it gets to its closest approach to the sun, it's called the perihelion, Perihelion, something like that, perihelion, which is its closest approach to the sun. And then it'll go all the way back out to the Oort cloud. So you have the asteroid belt, you have the Kuiper belt, and then you have the Oort cloud. And so now this is an amazing time that we're living in right now, because a lot of things on a celestial or space level are happening right now that haven't happened in a long time. In 52 years, which will be 2076, that will be America's 300th birthday. So America will turn 300 years old on July 4th in 2076. In 2076, Sedna will reach its perihelion, its closest approach to the sun. And I mean, just to do the math real quick, I think, I worked this out already, but I don't. Hold on one second. So 11,400 divided by 2. So it's going to reach this point, which is the closest approach to the sun, which it hasn't been here in 11,000 400 years. But when you add 11,400 years, which is the orbital time, to the year that we're in, oh no, it's 11,400. It's 2024. Yeah, I think it was 9,376 BC. That was the last time Sedna reached this point that it's going to reach in 2076. 9,376 BC, which is 11,400 years ago. So it's safe to say that the last time Sedna was here, which is where it's going to be in 2076, was a time of major problems on Earth, right? That was around the time of Noah's flood. There was a series of earthquakes that happened at that time that were, I think, separated by a couple thousand years that were really responsible or added to the destruction of the Earth. I mean, there was Noah's flood, but there was also, I think, between 9,000 and 6,000 something BC and then 3,000 BC, there was a whole series of earthquakes that just devastated the Earth. So I don't know if there's any relationship or correlation between Sedna's orbit and these Earth changes or this destruction of Earth or sea levels rising. I don't really know. I don't know if it actually gets close enough to the Earth to affect its magnetic field or to disrupt weather patterns. I don't know if it actually gets that close, but it's really coincidental that the last time it was where it's going to be in 2076, there was a lot of issues going on here on Earth. Cataclysmic issues, lots of destruction, earthquakes, just major devastation. So we're 52 years away from that. And also 2100 is the official year for the astrological age of Aquarius. So the astrological age of Pisces began in 60 BC, and it's a 2100 year period. And so it goes from 60, the astrological age of Pisces began in 60 BC, and that will end in 21 BC, in 2100 AD, and the astrological age of Aquarius will begin at that time. But that's not the only thing that's happening at that time, because if you could imagine, well, maybe I could draw it and make it a little easier for you to imagine. So imagine this is the circle here is the astrological wheel. So if you could imagine this to be split into 12 houses. So each astrological sign represents an astrological age, and each astrological age is a period of 2100 years. Is it? No, it's 2,160 years. So if you multiply 2,160 years times 12, it gives you 25,920 years. Now, 25,920 years is called a great year. I think it's called a great year. Yeah. A 25,920 year period is known as the great year. And that means that the sun moved through each astrological sign. So if you could imagine this, so if you add 25,920 plus 2100 AD, well, let's just say 25,920 years is the length of the great year. So this astrological age or this great year began when the sun was on the border or on the cusp of Pisces and Aquarius. So when the sun was in between Aquarius and Pisces, that was the beginning of this great year. So the sun had moved backwards through the zodiac, came around, and the astrological age of Pisces, which began in 60 BC, and then Jesus was born in around 4 BC, or the 0 year, or 1 AD. I don't know if they use a 0 year. So we have the astrological age of Pisces, and then that is coming to an end in 2100. So the sun has moved through all the signs. Basically, that's what a great year is. It's and each sign is 2,160 years. So when the sun moves into when the sun reaches the astrological age of Aquarius, and we officially move into the astrological age of Aquarius in 2100 AD, that will also be our re-entry into the age of light. Now, I was just telling you that time, or the great year, I think it's called a great year or a grand cycle. But if you could imagine the zodiac split in half, okay? Imagine the zodiac wheel split in half. And this line runs in between Pisces and Aquarius and Leo and Virgo, okay? So it began where that 0 is. That is the cusp of Pisces and Aquarius. Okay. So the zodiac, as far as the grand cycle or the great year is concerned, it's split in half, and there's a light side of the cycle, and then there's a dark half of the cycle. We've been in the dark half of this grand cycle since the age of, since the cusp point between Leo and Virgo, which I think was 10,860 BC. Or it's actually been for the last 13,000 years. So we spend 13,000 years in light, and then we spend 13,000 years in darkness. And when we're in light, I think the sun orbits, the Earth orbits the sun closer to the galactic center. So we're closer to the galactic radiation that comes out of the galactic center. So we're closer to the source of life during the light half of the grand cycle. So when they say that we're going into the age of Aquarius, we're also re-entering into the age of light, or the light half of the grand cycle, and that will be for the next 13,000 years. So there's a lot going on at this time. The end of a great year or a grand cycle and the beginning of a new one, that's happening in 76 years. Sedna's reaching perihelion in 52 years. That hasn't happened since 9,376 BC. So there's lots of stuff going on at this point in time right now. I really wish that I was going to be alive for Sedna's perihelion, or close approach. I really wish I was alive to see that, or going to be alive to see that. But I think I'll be 96 years old in 2076. I'm not sure if I'll be here, but I wanted to tell you that if you don't know who Edgar Cayce is, he was a sleeping prophet, and he made a prediction that he would return to Earth, or reincarnate, in 2100 AD with full memory of his life as Edgar Cayce, and which is really interesting, because later I found out that 2100 AD is our re-entry into the light half of the grand cycle, and it's also the beginning of the astrological age of Aquarius. So in one of his books, he says that he's going to reincarnate in 2100 AD with full memory of his life as Edgar Cayce. And when he does, the west coast of the United States is going to be up to, I think he said, Kansas. That means everything west of Kansas is going to be underwater. So it's really worth mentioning. So let's see. We covered the Chirotic cycle, heliocentric versus geocentric. This weekend for college football, I am an Ohio State Buckeye fan. I was a college football player. I do love the game of football. Always will, always have. And this weekend, there's a few big games this weekend. BYU, 14th ranked BYU, is taking on 21 ranked Arizona State. Number 18 Army is playing number 6 Notre Dame, and then the big game in the Big Ten is number 5 Indiana versus Ohio State. So we got 3 big games on this weekend. The season is just about over, um, which means that tournament time is coming up. Right, bowl season's coming up soon, so it's going to be really interesting to see who the 12 teams are and how that whole thing works out. I haven't really been paying attention too much to this college football season, but we're getting to that point that we probably should start talking about it. And there's 3 big games this weekend. I hope you guys enjoy that. If you're into football and you like football, it's going to be a good weekend for college games. And that's about it. That's all I have for you guys today. I hope you all have a great day and enjoy your Friday. It's payday. It's Friday. The weekend's coming up. So, all right, everyone, have a good one. I'll talk to you later.